Good morning, UUCC. My name is Brooke Abercrombie, and I joined UUCC during the pandemic. My decision to join was greatly influenced by Reverend Page's bold and direct acknowledgement of racial issues that still plague the United States 157 years after the troops marched into Galveston in 1865. However, please bear in mind, this was more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was delivered in 1863. And that's why, for me, Juneteenth is more than a celebration of freedom. It's also a reminder of how the United States continues to kick the can of social justice down the road. Today, I want to share some thoughts on the history of race, slavery, family, and freedom, particularly here in the United States. And I'm going to share some very personal family history notes today. It's not a comfortable reflection for me to share, and probably won't be easy for you to hear, but I do hope that in the end, it also offers hope. Of course, we all know the basics of race and slavery in the United States. Black people were enslaved by white people to provide unpaid labor that set the foundation for this nation's economy. What we don't all know is how that came to be and how intentional it was. The author Ta-Nehisi Coates, in his book, Between the World and Me, wrote these words: "Race is the child of racism, not the father." In the interest of time, I'll skip all of the reference and simply state that the construct of race was actually created in the 15th century and effectively weaponized in the 17th century. Whiteness symbolized purity and superiority. Anything not white, even the tiniest bit, was not pure and therefore not superior. Those who would proclaim themselves white would use the classification as Black for justification of enslavement for purely economic purposes. So it stands to reason that the term white supremacy is redundant. That is the part of the psychological component of systemic racism that I think we miss. I don't remember the exact occasion, and it quite possibly could have been Juneteenth last year, but Reverend Page mentioned something in one of her sermons that struck me and sent me down a rabbit hole that I'll go into shortly. But she mentioned that she recognized that not all white people were the descendants of slave owners, right? And so oftentimes they feel like, I wasn't a descendant of slave owners, so it's sort of an off the hook kind of argument that we hear often. However, white people are still the beneficiaries of the privilege that came along with being white. But even more so than that, it reminded me that though not all white people are the descendants of slave owners, all Black people in the United States are the descendants of slave owners. That makes me a little emotional. Slave owners often used Black women's bodies for sex, producing children whom they would then consider property. They sometimes sold, but seldom raised them as their own children. They didn't acknowledge them. This inspired me to research my own genealogy in search of my white ancestors. So I signed up for Ancestry DNA, and as fate would have it, excuse me, I soon discovered my first and so far only known white ancestor. It turns out that he was none other than one of the most notorious founding fathers, American revolutionary, third vice president to the United States, and yes, killer of Alexander Hamilton, Aaron Burr. While still married to Theodosia, Aaron Burr bore 2 children with her maidservant. Her name was Mary Emmons, also known as Eugenie Berharnais. And Mary was from Kolkata, India, and had gone independently, apparently, to Haiti, where she met Theodosia Prevost Burr's first husband, Jacques Prevost, who hired her as a maidservant. And then after Jacques Prevost died, she stayed on with Theodosia Prevost, who then married Aaron Burr. Now, Theodosia and Aaron Burr only had one child who survived, and that was Theodosia Jr., whom many of you may have heard in the play Hamilton, because he sings about her. She went on to have a child named Aaron Burr, who died at the age of 10. Theodosia died at sea. So therefore, there are no white living descendants of Aaron Burr. The only living descendants of Aaron Burr are through his Black grandchildren, because his children, Louisa Carroll and John Pierre Burr, who were half Indian and half white, found no community in Philadelphia because there were very few South Asians there. So they found community in the freed Black community, and that's where they found their respective spouses. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about John Pierre Burr, because he is just as special in my family lineage as Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr got his degree from Princeton at the age of 17, and he entered at the age of 13. His father was president of Princeton, then known as College of New Jersey, and his grandfather on his mother's side was also president of Princeton. However, John Pierre Burr, son of Aaron Burr, was denied entrance to Princeton solely because he was not white. He then went on to become a conductor on the Underground Railroad. Because he could pass for white, he often would walk Black runaway slaves to freedom. He was also an associate of Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass, and very active in the abolitionist movement. So fast forward, my father's grandmother, descendant of John Pierre Burr, was Sadie Burr Allen. She would also have two children, Vanita and Walter John Pierre. So she named her son for her great-great-grandfather. They were also both so light that they could pass for white. Vanita Allen, my grandmother, my father's mother, married a dark-skinned Black man. But because she could pass for white, they were often separated on the train as they traveled through the suburbs of Philadelphia. Walter John Pierre made a fateful decision. He decided, indeed, when he enlisted in World War I, that he would pass for white. This came at an enormous sacrifice because it meant he had to deny his family. So he joined the war, and through my research through Ancestry.com, I discovered that he did indeed marry, moved to Chicago, married a white woman, had 5 children before they were divorced, and after that, there is no history of my uncle, my great uncle. I can only wonder if possibly his secret was exposed, which led to his divorce, possibly his untimely demise. We will never know, because Walter John Pierre Burr never saw his Black family again, all so that he could reap the benefits of the privilege of appearing white. My distant cousin, Sherry Burr, who's a lawyer in New Mexico who actually did get to attend Princeton, did the research that resulted in the Aaron Burr Association acknowledging that John Pierre Burr was indeed the son of Aaron, and allowed for this fact to be put on his headstone at his grave. This did not happen until 2019, and again, met with great opposition. So this past week, literally last Friday, the 10th of June, I had the opportunity to meet my distant cousin Sherry and many other distant cousins who are related to Aaron Burr through his sister. So there were many white relatives there as well. But I say all of this to say that in the end, you could be sitting next to a Black person who is your distant relative. For us as Black people in the United States, we are not only children of the enslaved, but children of the white slave owners. And we are denied the inheritance of the benefits of this country in so many different systemic ways, and yet we are family. I hope that as we move forward, that my white brothers and sisters and cousins and aunties and uncles will look around you and begin to look at people that you've been conditioned to think of as other, as family.